Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be a truly massive fabric haul that I'm filming at the request of people over on Instagram. I mentioned that I was going into the garment district to do some shopping and a lot of people were curious to see what I bought. And then I did a poll and like 98% people voted that I should do a haul video. So I couldn't say no to that and here I am today. Now, I said a while back that I wasn't going to be filming fabric hauls anymore, and I still don't plan on doing a lot of these, but this was kind of a set of unique circumstances, and I really wanted to share everything that I purchased. And by everything that I purchased, I mean about 60 pounds of fabric, which is more than 180 yards of material. Now, if you follow me over on Patreon, you might be wondering why I bought so much fabric. In fact, even if you don't follow me on Patreon, you might be wondering that. I know over there, I recently said that I wasn't planning on purchasing any more fabric, at least for a while, and I really felt like I had enough fabric and enough ideas, and I didn't need to add to my ever-growing stash. I stuck by that for about 6 weeks, but then I realized that one of the cuts of silk that I purchased for a Patreon project was damaged. So I went into the garment district intending to just get a single 10-yard cut of red silk. And unfortunately I could not find red silk, but I did find out that one of my favorite stores in the garment district was closing, which really sucks. I feel like a lot of my favorite stores in the garment district have been closing, and this was actually the first time that I'd seen one of the stores in its early stages of shutting down. So there was a lot of fabric remaining in the store, but it was all discounted by a lot. And I'm talking ridiculously good prices. So even though on that specific trip I hadn't intended on buying any fabric, I ended up walking away with about 30 yards of fabric. And I shared those fabrics in my last video, which was a New York City vlog. And if you haven't seen that, then I will link it down below. And after I got back from that trip and I was folding the fabric, I couldn't stop thinking about the store and all the fabrics that I'd left behind. So I decided that I was going to go back in later in the week and make a few more purchases. And by a few more purchases, I mean 130 yards of fabric. Yay! I know that's going to seem absolutely ridiculous to some people. I think it's kind of ridiculous, and I'm the person that bought all the fabric, but I don't regret it at all. They were down to such great prices, and I know I'm going to use them someday, and I'm definitely going to be happy when that day comes that I got them at a fraction of what I would pay online or even in the garment district under normal circumstances. So I hope you guys won't judge me too much and will instead just enjoy seeing all of the pretty fabrics. Now, I've actually filmed this video once before. I curled my hair for it, I put on a really cute outfit, but the footage was basically unusable due to issues with my camera and the lighting. So to save my sanity, instead of holding up all of the fabric and then including close-ups, I'm just going to set up the camera so it's facing my table, and then I can show you the fabric in more detail and talk about it there. So you won't be seeing a lot of me in this video, but I don't think that's a big loss. So I'm just going to jump right into showing off all the fabric, and I really hope you enjoy! So I thought I would go ahead and start by showing you the fabrics that I bolted. I only have 5 bolts of fabric, and then I have several dozen cuts of fabric that are all folded. So this just seemed like a good starting point. Now, the majority of the materials that I purchased were silks, just because I find silk to be the most versatile material. So when I'm buying fabric without a specific project in mind, I find silk is usually a safe bet. So that's what I mostly stocked up on, but there were a few cottons in there, like these two, along with some glitter mesh and some jacquard and some brocades. So I'm going to show you all of it, and I'm starting off with the 2 cottons. Now I have 10 yards of both of these, and they were both $2 a yard, if I'm correct. So I thought that was a pretty good deal and certainly worth stocking up on. Now the one on top is very similar in texture and feel to a similarly colored striped fabric that I used for an Edwardian ensemble last year. It's very thin and has a bit of stiffness and volume without being crisp. So I feel like this is a really good versatile fabric. The only downside about it is that it's stretchy, and I didn't realize this in store because it was on a roll, but it actually does stretch somewhat significantly on the horizontal grain line. However, that means it's going to be less prone to wrinkling too, so that might end up actually being quite convenient depending on what I use it for. And I don't have a specific project for this in mind, but I think it would be cool for something 1880s, perhaps some sort of bustle dress that has a lot of ruffles. This one I probably like a little bit better. I just think the seersucker texture to this makes it a little bit more interesting, and I like the color palette a little bit more than this one. But given the price, I think they're both worth picking up, and I think this would look really lovely for some sort of bustle dress as well. This next one is probably one of my favorites, even though it's far from the most exciting. This is a very pale seafoam minty colored green silk shantung. And I love shantung so much. Silk shantung is my favorite fabric to work with by far. It doesn't slip around when you're cutting it, it's not as prone to puckering as taffeta, and I feel like the slub in the weave adds a bit of texture to a garment, which makes it look more expensive, even though shantung is typically cheaper than most other types of silk. So it's a fabric that I really enjoy working with. However, in the garment district, they never seem to have it in the colors I want in a large enough quantity. So I've been looking for silk shantung in a pale color for a long time because I really want to make a walking dress from the natural form era. Before the automobile made a dress like this several years back, and I remember just being amazed by the beauty of it, and it's made me really interested in that style of dress. But I've never found a fabric that I actually wanted to use for that type of dress, so I've never researched it very thoroughly. But I feel like this is the fabric for it, and I purchased everything they had left on the bolt, which was just about 12 yards. So that should be plenty for that style of dress, or at least I hope it will be. And I think it's a really lovely color and weight and texture for something like that as well. So I was really excited to see this and to see it at such a reasonable price point. I'm going to save the grayish blue bolt for later because it goes with other fabrics that I want to show you, but I will go ahead and introduce you to this sparkly monstrosity. This was one of the 3 incredibly sparkly glitter meshes that I purchased, and I love them all pretty much equally, but this one has a special place in my heart since it's the most dramatic. So this is a black mesh, and it has the most beautiful glitter spray border on either edge, along with all of these glitter sprayed appliques in the middle. Now this is a glitter spray fabric, so it doesn't have any embroidery or beading or sequins or rhinestones on it, which means it's a very light fabric, and it's also a very inexpensive fabric, at least in terms of these decorative sort of overlay materials. For example, a lace where all of this is done with embroidery and beads would probably be closer to $30 or $40 a yard, whereas you can usually find this fabric for about $10. However, for this one, since it was a closing sale, I purchased the 5 yards for $20. My plan for this fabric is to use it to make a very full, kind of 1950s A-line inspired dress with a structured bodice that incorporates all of this gorgeous silver work. And I'm going to pair it with a really obnoxious pair of shoes that match this fabric perfectly. And those shoes are from a regular choice, and they have unicorns on them, and I purchased them as a little reward to myself for finishing a McCall's pattern, and I had nothing to pair with them. So I'm going to make myself a equally obnoxious dress to go with them. On the topic of glitter, I did purchase 2 more glittery fabrics, and I've actually worked with this exact fabric in purple before. I made a dress out of it that I featured on my blog, and it was a 1930s fantasy themed dress, and I really love how it turned out. It was quite easy to make, but it was a really flattering, striking dress, I think both in design and in how it flattered the figure, and of course the fabric I used helped. So I'd really like to make another one of those dresses and potentially try and pitch it as a pattern for McCall's. So when I saw that they had a couple of these materials in different colors, I decided to grab them up. And the one on top is pink and gold, and unfortunately they only had 3 yards of this, which isn't enough to do a lot with it, but I like this fabric so much that I had to have it anyway. Now the thing I really like about this design of fabric is that it only has the border on one edge. So the black fabric I just showed you had the same border on both edges of the material, and then about 20 inches in the middle of these smaller glitter spray appliques. That's really nice if you're making a short dress or using it as trim because you get double the amount of borders. But if you want to make a full length dress, then having a double border material means that you'll see part of the top border around the waistline of the garment, which can make it look less flattering and less planned out and kind of less expensive and elegant in general. So I tend not to buy those fabrics unless I know I'm using them for a short dress. And it's very rare to find a netting or lace fabric that only has a single border. But this one does, which is part of the reason I love it, on top of it just being sparkly and wonderful. So as I said, I purchased 3 yards of the pink one, which was all they had, and then I also purchased 5 yards of this vibrant mustardy gold one. So if I do end up making another one of those dresses and pitching it as a pattern, this is the fabric that I'd use for it, and then I'd find some sort of matching satin to use as the lining. Now the first fabrics on the pile are actually ones I've shown already in my previous video, but I know not everyone saw that video, and I also wasn't filming that in the best lighting conditions conditions. So I thought I would really quickly show you those fabrics again, and hopefully the sheen of them and the true colors will be a little bit more visible now that I'm filming this next to a window during a period when there's actual natural sunlight. So the first fabric that I picked up is this really lovely jacquard slash brocade. As I said in my last video, it's like a brocade without the sheen. And I really like the print of this as well as the colors that are incorporated in it. I found a lot of these fabrics didn't have enough contrast in them for me to find them interesting, but I really liked the black paired with the reddish pinkish tone and then the lighter, almost mauvey gray base. So I thought this was really lovely and I picked up 5 yards of it. And then I picked up 1 or 2 yards of a pink shantung that goes really, really nicely with it, as well as 3 or 4 yards of this dark gray dupioni, which goes with it really nicely as well. And I'm probably going to use that for some sort of menswear inspired Elizabethan ensemble. And I purchased a couple yards of this waffle weave suiting. I'd really like to make some sort of overcoat slash doublet to go with that as well. So that would be a really interesting project and challenge for me. I purchased another set of 3 silks that I think go really, really nicely together. And all started with this multicolored shantung. So this has the typical shantung feel of silk, but what's really special about it is all the different colors of threads that weave through it. It adds a lot of depth to the fabric. It makes it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more textured. So I thought this would be really lovely for something Renaissance themed, though I now realize that this is very similar in color to the Renaissance dress I made with McCall's. So perhaps I should try and think of a different use for it. But I really, really love this fabric. And then I picked up 2 yards of this ivory shantung, which bring out some of the lighter threads woven into that fabric, as well as this two-tone orange one, and it shifts almost between orange and this greenish gold. It's really striking and lovely. So I think these 3 will look really pretty together and work really well together. I must say I do regret not getting more of this when I went back. I really should have purchased 6 or 7 yards so I'd have enough for an 18th century underskirt, but I talked myself out of it right at the end and I'm still kicking myself for it. Also on that first trip, I picked up this beautiful silk dupioni, and I love the color of this so much. I think it's showing up better in this footage than it did in the previous video. It's a really vibrant dark emerald green, and I realize vibrant and dark aren't words that really go together, but it really is a deep tone while still having a lot of vibrancy. And I really, really love it, and I can't wait to do something with it. I have enough of this to make some sort of dress or robe if I want to turn it into something 18th century inspired, and I just think I'm going to have a lot of fun with that. I really don't think this is going to show up on camera, and that kills me inside because this is the prettiest shantung I've ever seen. It has almost a jewel beetle effect where it shifts from this really bright, vibrant green to almost a bluish tone. And it's so striking in person, but since it's such a saturated neon color, it really does not capture well on camera. But I'm going to use this to make some sort of late Victorian skirt, and I'm probably going to make a blouse out of this fabric to go with it. This is a really, really lovely, delicate silk fabric, and I actually already have some of this in my stash, but I wanted to get more since it was such a good price and so good for historical blouses. And I love it so much. I'm so happy to have more of this in my collection. I think I purchased 4 yards of this one, and then there are 5 yards of this silk, which should be plenty for the skirt that I have in mind for it. I don't think this would be a very time-consuming project, so perhaps I could do a weekend vlog about it if you guys would be interested in seeing it. This was an impulse buy right at the end. It's polyester of some sort, but it's a very lightweight feeling polyester. Again, almost like organza, though it's certainly more opaque. What I found really striking about this was the quilted design on it. It's woven into this diamond design, and then there are fake pearls at the corners of each diamond. So it creates a really cool amount of texture, and paired with the sheen of the fabric, I think it looks a lot more expensive than it actually was. This reminds me of the texture you see on sleeves in the 15 and 1600s, as well as medieval armor. So I'm probably going to use this for some sort of fantasy costume, just as quick and dirty undersleeves. I keep forgetting to show things close up. I officially apologize for all of the ones I've neglected to do this for. This is probably my favorite pairing / combination of fabrics that I purchased, and it was one that I almost didn't end up getting. I believe this jacquard / brocade was covered in plastic, which means they hadn't sold any of it before. And it was in a dark corner of the store where it didn't look particularly spectacular. But I wanted to get a darker toned brocade from them, so I asked them to take it out to the front and unwrap it. And when they did, holy crap, this fabric is gorgeous. So I purchased 7.5 yards of it. And it has a typical kind of rectangular paisley-ish design that you see on a lot of these fabrics, but it has the prettiest two-tone effect to it. So it shifts between teal and gold and blue, and once you get it laid out and the sun hits it, it's just stunning. I'm going to use it for some sort of late 1500s or early 1600s design that I haven't quite decided on yet, but I think it's going to be stunning. I also purchased 6 yards of this fabric. This was one of the weirdest fabrics I came across, and it's also kind of one of my favorites, even though I think it feels and looks a little bit like really cheap lame that you would get from Joann's, though it has silk in it, so it's more expensive than that, though not by much given the discount I was getting on these. The reason I like this fabric so much is because I feel like it's a bit different than traditional brocades. A lot of the gold brocades you see in the garment district use the gold to create a floral design on the fabric, or they just have the gold fibers woven in throughout. But with this one, the gold threads are woven into a pinstripe design that goes over top of a floral pattern that is made from green threads. So it's a little bit of a twist on that design, and it gives it the most beautiful sheen. Like when the sun hits this, it literally lights up. So I thought this was really pretty, and that actually works really well with this fabric. So I'm hoping to use this for an underskirt and then this for an overdress. But I love that pairing, and I can't wait to figure out what to do with those and to get to working with them. Another two-tone fabric that I purchased is a silk shantung, and I purchased 6 yards of this, which was probably less than I should have purchased. I usually try and buy 8 yards of fabric if I don't know what to do with it, since that is enough to make a full-length dress from pretty much every era. However, since this is wider, I can probably do something out of it anyway. So it has a base color of this mustardy goldish shade, but it has a really strong green shift to it. And I don't know how much is going to show up on camera, but in person it's really striking and pretty. And I know once this is cut and gathered up into some sort of historical ensemble, that shifting effect is really going to shine in the folds of the skirt and make it look really elaborate and interesting, even if it's a relatively simple dress. Wow, look, it's another tone shifting silk. However, this one is a silk taffeta, and it has a reddish base to it, but it shines the most vibrant shade of teal. Like, it is seriously so pretty, and again, I don't know how much it's going to show up on camera, but when this is turned into a dress, all of those different colors are really going to shine. So again, I can't wait to work with this one. I purchased 10 whole yards of it because it's quite narrow. And they actually had this in a few different colors, which I didn't pick up because I wasn't sure how I would like working with this weight of fabric. Silk taffeta is kind of a mystery to me because some silk taffeta feels like cardboard. Like, it is just so stiff and difficult to work with. And then there are other silk taffetas like this one that feel almost like Kleenex. They're so fine and slightly stiff, but also see-through and just weird. I've never made a dress out of silk that is that consistency, so I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, and I didn't want to invest another $40 into another cut of it, but I did think it was worth getting this one because I loved the tone of it so much, and I am curious to try out this weight of silk. I purchased 2 yards of this really lovely silk satin charmeuse, and I say satin charmeuse because this is a lot thicker than your typical silk charmeuse. I hate saying that word. Why did I just say that word like 8 times? It feels almost like a satin, but it's much more silky, I guess, feeling, and softer. And it's the prettiest peach shade, kind of a pale coral color. And I have some lace that is slightly deeper than this that I'm going to pair this with. And I'm probably going to attempt a 1920s dress, since that's what I originally purchased that lace for. Even though I don't particularly like how the 1920s silhouette looks on me, I think it would be a fun test for me, and this would work really well as lining for that piece. So I got 2 yards of it, which is all they had. If they'd had more, I probably would have purchased 3 yards just to provide myself with some wiggle room. So I finally reached the 2 fabrics that go with this bolt, so I can show it to you. This is another tone shifting material, but it's a lot more subtle. You don't really see it until it's crumpled up, and then you notice all of the different tones that pull out of this fabric. But it is primarily a pale grayish bluish color, and then it has a lighter fleur-de-lis pattern woven into it. And I came across this fabric by mistake when I was looking for a silk to go with this jacquard. So this is what originally caught my eye. As I said, I was looking through their entire selection of these, and a lot of them didn't have much contrast to them, so I ended up putting most of them back. But I really liked the palish gray color of this one against the brighter coral colored flowers. So I was looking through all of their silks, trying to find a grayish tone silk that would go well with this, so I could get enough materials that go together to actually make something out of it. And I couldn't find any silks, but I did find this jacquard. Actually, I'm sorry, I've been calling this a jacquard. It's really more of a damask fabric, I would say. But anyway, it's really, really pretty, and it's got a wonderful crisp texture to it, almost like a high quality taffeta. And I thought it paired really well with this one. It doesn't quite look like they go together in this lighting, but in person I think they do, and they really pull out kind of the best tones within each other. And then I also purchased a yard of this dupioni, which pull out the corally tones in this brocade fabric. Anyway, I love how this trio looks together, and I'm so looking forward to figuring out what to make out of it and then making it. But I do think this is going to be some sort of medieval ensemble. So this is a very similar fabric to that last blue one I showed you. Again, it's from the same collection, except this one has a lilac-y, mauve-y toned base, and then these really bright gold flowers woven into it. And this has a very fine weave, so I really liked that. And it almost shifts gold when the light hits it, because there are gold threads woven into it to create those flowers. So I thought this was a really pretty fabric, and I purchased 3 yards of it. And then I purchased 6 yards of this silk blend. At least I think it's a silk blend. There's definitely silk in it, but I don't know what it's blended with. I describe this fabric as feeling like what you would expect silk broadcloth to feel like when you think about really cheap broadcloth that has that kind of stiffness to this, but this has a much finer weave and a softness that you associate with silk. However, actual silk broadcloth doesn't have any stiffness to it. It feels almost like a lightweight rayon. It's incredibly drapey and silky and smooth. So this isn't silk broadcloth, but it reminds me of what I would think silk broadcloth would feel like if I hadn't actually felt silk broadcloth. Are you with me? Anyway, I thought this was a really interesting fabric. It almost looks like linen when you get up close to it. It has a similar weave to it and incorporates a lot of different materials which give it a lot of texture and almost a two-tone effect when the light hits it. So it's really, really subtle, but it's more interesting than a lot of comparable fabrics I've seen out there. So I thought I would get 6 yards of this, which is enough to make a skirt of some sort. And I have no idea what this is going to be for, but I liked them and I liked them together, so I bought them. And I actually like that material enough that I purchased it in a different color as well. This one is brown, and it has some reddish and ivory and yellowy tones woven into it as well. So again, it has more texture to it, and it looks a little bit more interesting than a plain brown fabric might. And I think I'm going to use this for some sort of casual 18th century ensemble. This is very similar to those other two fabrics, but it's narrower and feels a little bit more like silk dupioni. It's a little bit less crisp and has a bit of a softer drape. I don't quite know how to describe this color. I guess like a muted copper, maybe? But I thought this would be really pretty for the bottom half of some project that I haven't decided on just yet. But it would definitely be something pre-1800s as the lower half for a more casual ensemble, since this isn't a texture that you would usually see on more expensive garments. I do kind of want to make another pair of jumps, and maybe I could use this to make a skirt to go with them. That's another project I would really love to pitch to McCall's, because I feel like it's quite easy to make and it's quite practical as a historical costume. I purchased 3 yards of this silk for a 18th century chemise, and silk wasn't traditionally used for chemises since it is quite delicate and couldn't hold up to the washing that was required. But I recently went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the Versailles exhibit, and they had one garment displayed with the prettiest, most delicate chemise I've ever seen, and it looked like the cuffs of it were made from chiffon, and they almost had a braided effect with how they were gathered, and I really want to do something similar. And I don't think I could pull something similar off with cotton. So when I saw this, I decided it was the perfect fabric. It feels like chiffon, but even more delicate. However, it's also textured with a stripe pattern. So I think this is going to be perfect for pulling that off. And maybe if I have enough left, I could use it for decorative sleeves or something, because it's a really, really cool fabric, and I'd like to incorporate it into as many different projects as I can. But I picked this one up right at the end, and I was getting towards the end of the amount of money I'd budgeted for that trip. So I just picked up 3 yards of this, which should be enough for a chemise. Another fabric I wish I had gotten more of is this silk linen material, and the reason I like this so much is because it has silver threads woven through it. So this has both that visual interest that you get with traditional linen while also incorporating metallic threads. And this fabric is usually $8 to $10 in the garment district since it does have silk in it, but this was less than half of that price. So I purchased 2 yards of it, and again, I kind of wish I'd purchased more. If I bought 6 yards of this, I could use it as an underskirt for something. I don't know if I'm likely to reach for fabric like this for an underskirt, so it's probably a good call on my part just getting the 2 yards, but I'd be happy to get more of this someday because it is really, really lovely. We are nearing the end, so I'm going to save a more exciting fabric combination for last, and in the meantime I'll show you this cotton. So I purchased 4 yards of this, and it was $2 a yard if I recall correctly, and I just like this because it's very lightweight and it is white, so it is accurate for some sort of historical foundation, but it does have a bit of a texture to it. So it has squares woven into it, and then there's a little floral design woven into each square. And though the print on this probably isn't historically accurate, I like using fabrics with a little bit more texture for every part of historical costumes that I can, just because I think it makes them read a little bit better on camera, and it makes them a little bit more interesting to work on, and you avoid having a garment look really flat and inexpensive, just because the material itself doesn't have a lot of life to it. So I like using textured fabrics when I can, even if they aren't super historically accurate. So picked up 4 yards of that, and I'm sure I will find a chemise to make out of it someday. I also purchased this teeny tiny cut of silk. There's about 1 3/4 of a yard there, and they gave it to me for the price of 1 yard. And I have a collar from the 1930s that matches the ivory tones in this perfectly, so I'm hoping I have enough here to scrape some sort of dress together, but I'm not feeling super confident about that because I'm a relatively large person and I don't think 1.5 yards of material will go a long way. But I liked it too much to leave it behind despite the small quantity, and it's kind of a traditional toile print, so there are trees and farmers and people on boats and little houses. It's just a very delicate, lovely print, and I think it would look nice for a dress if I can scrape together enough to make one out of it. Now the final fabric I want to show you is actually a combination of 4 fabrics. Ta-da! So I'm going to show you the mesh first, since this is what spurred on all of these other purchases. So I saw this fabric when I first walked in the door, and I knew right away that I wanted it. It reminds me a lot of the beadwork that you see on Edwardian dresses or 1920s projects, and it is actually beaded. So unlike the mesh that I showed you earlier that had the glitter spray on it, the detailing on this is all embroidered, and it has seed beads outlining that embroidery. And the embroidery is kind of a mauve-ish purple color, and then the base of the fabric is a more reddish, kind of pale raisiny tone. All the beads are a very light purple with a opalish, bluish, whitish shift to them. And it's just a lovely fabric, and I feel like the design is just dense enough to look elaborate without being too dense that's overpowering. So I really, really liked this. And I ended up getting the cut of 6 yards of it for $40. So it was by far the most expensive fabric that I purchased that day, but I think it was worth it, and the 6 yards should be enough to make something early 1900s out of it, as well as something 1920s themed out of it. So I got fabrics that I could use under this for both of those pieces. So the first fabric I purchased 6 yards of, and this is a China silk. China silk is one of my least favorite of the silk family to work with, but it does work really nicely underneath things since it's stiff enough and opaque enough to hold its own as a slip. It's also very, very thin, so it doesn't add volume to your body and make you appear larger underneath whatever you put over top of it. So I really like it as a base fabric, even if I don't really like it as a fabric on its own. So I purchased 6 yards of it in this purpley tone, which I think works really, really nicely with this fabric. I really love those together as a pairing, and I'm going to use this for the Edwardian dress. And I purchased 3 yards of this one, which is a much lighter fabric, and it kind of has those same purplyish, pinkish, muted, mauve-y undertones, but it's obviously a much, much paler version. And I think this looks really nice underneath it as well. It creates a different effect, but it's still a very expensive looking effect. So I'd like to use this fabric for the 1920s dress, and this one for the 1910s dress. And then they also had this really pretty silky crocheted fabric, which I thought might be kind of cool for the Edwardian dress, maybe as detailing around the neckline, and it goes really well with the China silk. So that is the final purchase that I made. I might have a couple other fabrics from the shopping trip hiding out somewhere, but you've certainly seen the majority of it. And my camera is flashing at me now, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut to the outro. So that is the end of my massive haul. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a little different than my other fabric hauls because instead of sharing specific plans for all of the materials, I was kind of just showing off all of my purchases, which isn't how I really like to film these, but I do also think it makes it a little bit more interesting in some ways because then you guys can suggest things for the fabrics since I don't necessarily have them already attached to a project. And on that note, I would really love to hear any ideas you might have for these materials, what you would make out of them, which one was your favorite, which one was your least favorite, was there one that you think I should have gotten more of, or one that you don't think I should have purchased at all? Or if you don't have any opinions about the fabrics that I purchased, maybe you can tell me about your most recent purchases. I know I love to hear about that too. Regardless, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then giving it a like and a comment really helps me out. And if you'd just like to see more of my content in general, then you can always subscribe, and I think that is the entire spiel. Again, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to all of you very soon.